this exhibition here at the ZKM is definitely a huge highlight because it's the biggest exhibition we've ever done with like 14 works, with a lot of space. A lot of pieces have been reactivated or reprogrammed. Laurent has been, I think, now almost 2 years working on getting all these works running again, because it looks very easy, but actually it's like often the code from the 90s or early 90s that has to be readapted to new machines.
Yes, a lot of pieces were dormant. They were, of course, in a different state than they are today. We tried to keep it as it was. That means the technology behind is different, but the pieces themselves have not changed. That I didn't make it more complex, or I didn't change the graphics, I didn't change anything about that. The challenge for me was to actually digest all these codes that I wrote years ago at the same time, so I have to dig to every program and remember them. It was like a bit like a Frankenstein moment where you put electricity into something and then it just wakes up. And it wakes up it's very fresh, because these computer graphics, they don't get old. I mean, they don't age like a photography. They don't show the materiality of it. So it's not even like a picture, because it's vector graphics. You can do any kind of resolutions. The medium itself escapes time. That's very rare, actually, in the art.
This installation, what we see behind us, is called Eau de Jardin. It was made in 2004. At that time, we were still living in Japan, and we got the commission by Shiseido, the cosmetics company, and they wanted to have an installation for their foyer based on plants, and they have seen the interactive plant growing installation from 1992, and they wanted to have something similar for their foyer. So what we did is reuse this idea of a plant as interface and put 8 plants in front of a large vaulted screen that is composed of 3 projections. And when people touch the plants, they can grow artificial plants on the big screen. And the inspiration was that you could feel a bit like the sea roses or the Monet type of feeling of being immersed in a water garden. That's why it's called Eau de Jardin, water of the garden. And Laurent made a special effect that is like dripping water, and the image is constantly moving. And what we like especially is this idea of living interfaces or intuitive interfaces, like for example a plant that can become an interface. And in fact, a real plant is always an interface, because a real plant senses its environment anyway. It's just invisible to us right now because we have a very different speed of vision. But if we would be able to see slow processes of growing of plants, then we would see that the plant itself is constantly adapting to the environment. And what we like often to do with our installations is to make people aware of seeing the natural world maybe through a different point of view.
Yeah, often the visitors ask us where is the sensor, but in fact the sensor is the plant, because the whole body of the plant is sensing the environment. And like Krista was mentioning, the plant is receiving information from outside, and this information can be electrical fields, for example. Electrical fields we all have around us. What we do is just amplify and filter this information through the roots of the plant. So there is only one piece of wire just at the root. And the interface is then filtering the information, and we get the data, the digital data, and conduct this growth that you see on the screen through an algorithm. So the algorithm is of course a kind of an imitation of what the plant looks like, but it's not meant to be the truth. Neither it looks completely like the plant, but it gives you the feeling of a development, and also reflects your interaction with the plant. That means it's not just a switch, it's not just on off. You approach the plants already with your body, with your tension. You have a specific way how to move your hands from one leaf to another, and this is already an influence to what you see graphically. And an interface is not meant to translate one-to-one. It's not meant to translate what the plant feels, but more about your feelings towards the plant is reflected in the screen.
Haze Express was actually really like a train that creates images that are very hazy, and they're getting faster or slower depending on how you interact with this train window. At that time we lived in Japan and we did quite a lot of trips with the Shinkansen train. So we were always fascinated by the speed of the train, of course, and the landscapes going by. And we were very lucky that at that time Professor Sakane, who was the head of the Yamas Institute of Advanced Media Art and Science, where we were teaching already as professors, he had very good connection to the Shinkansen company, and we were able to go into the kind of scrap yard where they had the old train windows and the old train furniture, and they allowed us to pick up a few items there. And so we decided, okay, let's create a train compartment where with your interaction and your touching you could create a kind of abstract train ride that uses this parametric landscape creation.
When you're on the train, you only see part of the reality. You cannot really tell what is on the side. So you only see it there, and this window is quite important. It's your reality. The past, the present is on both sides. The future will come, and then you don't know what it's going to be. And the past is what you remember. But this window is the present. Well, all these little lights have behavior. And so they either do things together or they do things independently. They are in 3 dimensions. So the small elements at the end are much lower than the front ones. And therefore you really see a landscape. And of course it's abstract, so it's not like representing a real city. It's not meant to look like a specific thing, but it could recall you something. So like rain falling, snowy landscape at night, or little cities, or something like that. Sometimes I say, oh, well, I saw something fantastic, but then you can try and you will never get it. And this is what I like also. That was the moment where you captured something, and it's for you only.
Evolve is the first work where we really use genetic algorithms. The very first version of Evolve was created in NCSA, National Center of Supercomputing Application, in Champaign-Urbana. We had a kind of artist in residency there. We had this idea of a pool of life where you create artificial life and also interact with this artificial life. There was also the Ars Electronica Festival that was coordinated and also led by Peter Weibel, called Genetic Art. I think it was Genetic Art Artificial Life, specifically on artificial life topic. And all the major scientists, researchers who were dealing with artificial life at that time, like Larry Yeager, Christopher Langton, Tom Ray, William Latham, I think, was there as well. I think Dawkins was there as well, Richard Dawkins. So it was a really super inspiring festival, and we were like really night and day listening to the lectures there and also seeing the projects that were being displayed. And so we said, let's also make a work that deals with artificial life. And we already had this idea of the pool with the water. And we showed it the year after, also again at Ars Electronica, and got right away the Golden Nika Award, even though this was our second work only, or third work. We really went into this field of artificial life quite quickly, and through the Golden Nika Award, we also got the invitation to Japan and work at the research center in Tokyo and in Kyoto. And so all these steps were sort of really important for finishing, for elaborating the Evolve project further. So it's a combination of Laurent's interface design with the pool and the hand detection, but also getting a lot of input and knowledge and connections to the field of A-life and genetic programming. And there's quite a lot of sophisticated methodology behind of how these little creatures are mating, how they are evolving, how they are reacting to the environment. It looks simple, but it's a very complex piece.
So the shape of the creatures that you make have some characteristics. When you are doing this kind of profile, you make a shape that could look like a balloon that may be open on both ends or just closed. It's more like a tube or something more complex. So for example, if the creature is open on one end, that means there's more like a jellyfish and it makes a different sound than if it's a closed form. And the volume of it is also counting, and it's also in stereo. That means there is a spanning from where the creature is in the pool. And when the creatures are reproducing, then the new creatures also get a specific sound for it. And when it's very small, it's very, very high pitch. The volume can go down as it grows.
In phototropy, you see a large screen with different forms that grow by themselves when you enter. And then you also find on a small pedestal a flashlight. And when you take this flashlight and switch it on, you will see right away the real light beam of the lamp. And suddenly you also see lots of little insects coming out, like moths or butterflies, or some of them look a bit like bees. And you soon discover that when you move the beam of this flashlight, the insects come towards the light, and maybe you see them dying. So you find out, oh, okay, maybe these insects react to the light. You find out that if you move the lamp, then the insects go to the light and eventually reproduce if they reach enough light. And this is again done with genetic programming, that when two insects come together, they exchange their genetic code and the child insect is born, which looks similar to the parent's insect. And eventually, if you're careful, you get more and more such insects and eventually a big swarm. So it's a kind of a game between life and death. And what we really like about it is that it's really talking about a lot of concepts that are important to us, is this delicate balance between taking care of life and, you know, also eventually see it decay if you are not careful enough.
Present time is very important for us. This is the moment of creation. That's the now. And this now is traveling somehow. We can always get close to it, but never grasp it. In many of these artworks, we are not using recordings, but we are using the present time to let the user be the creators and not just us. And for us, it's always so interesting to see how people interact, exchange. We talk with people discovering the works, and it's always very interesting and nourishing also for our work to see how it goes, how it develops, and what are the expectations.
I studied originally sculpture in Vienna after I studied botany. After finishing my study, I had already some plant motifs in my work, which I did with books, with cutouts, with some kind of wooden sculpture. But I was not very satisfied with this materiality. And I was looking for something that would be, in a way, lighter and also more conceptual. And I was lucky to meet a gallerist in Vienna who told me, I think Peter Weibel, you should talk to Peter Weibel. And I showed what I have done so far to Peter Weibel, and he said like, oh, you should use computers, you should use computers. Come to Frankfurt. And I was not so sure because I didn't know anything about computers and I was a bit scared about it. But finally I was like, yeah, why not? Let's go to Frankfurt. And in Frankfurt at the Institute for New Media, there were latest computers and we got some courses in programming. And there was also a lot of interesting people there. Steinar Vasulka was there, Matt Mulligan was there, Jeffrey Shaw was there, Agnes Hegedus. So there was like a really interesting community. And I remember Peter gave me a book by Louis Beck, which was at the beginning a bit confusing to me because I didn't understand it. But then after, you know, reflecting on it, Louis Beck was doing this zoomorphology. He called himself zoosystematician. And this was very similar to what I have actually been trying to do with my plant motifs. And I made a book called Iconophila, which was about the plant motifs that I tried into a kind of fictitious classification of plant schemes based on Carl von Linné. And Peter saw right away this connection and told me, well, it might be good to, you know, use computer and grow your plant motifs. And that's what Laurent came in
Yeah, my background is different than Christa, but I also studied art in my city, in France, and I was already doing electronic for audio at this time for myself as a kind of performer. So I started to really love the field of electroacoustic, which is called electronic music today. That means in early times. That means end of 70s, 76, I started to build my own circuits to make sounds, because I heard actually in the radio many interesting pieces from Pierre-Henri Stockhausen and then Pierre Boulez and all these people making music with electronic devices. And I thought this is it. I really love to make this also myself, but as a 10 years old, you don't buy any equipment, so I started to build it on my own. Completely on my own. That means the field of electronic was new to me, but I slowly learned through magazines, through different trials and error, and this built it up a lot in my life. I was really doing after that some events in public, mixing up. The computers also came in at this time. The early 80s were full of little machines that you could acquire and program. And the combination of the two was perfect for me. It was also the early time for MIDI music, so it was really that moment to pick up on that field. And then I learned programming by doing music, basically by doing live events. So not recording music, not making scores, but programming algorithms to create sound pieces, but also interactively. So I connected sensors, either using microphones or sensors to the real instruments, and tried to synchronize the combinations. And it was an exploration, of course. But then later on, I met a person who is a musician, a professional musician, Ken Carter, who is an American musician, who was working with Steve Lacy, who is a very famous jazz player with improvisation. And then this came really into a bigger picture to me. And I was planning to continue in this direction. But then I also was interested in visual art. In the school where I was studying, there was no computer study, nothing. I could only manage to go to what was existing in the school, and was video. So I did that and I graduated with it, but in my mind to continue with this experimentation with computers and eventually sound or visuals. I did my first 3D animation with a spider, so the insect is coming into play. I applied then after my study to the Institute for New Media, and I won the grant, a European grant called Pépinière Européenne from Paris, and could go there in the Institute for Media in Frankfurt. And this is where I met Christa. And this is now the story where we met, because I came 3 months after everyone started. And so everything was already taken, all the computer resources. I had no access, and I tried to find out, okay, where could I fit in this, and who could help me? It was not easy. And then I met Christa, and she was working on the computer. We had shift, so we have like
2 hours
two hours a day. But it was all fixed, and I asked her kindly if she could let me be with her and then try to see what she was doing. And I saw that she was doing animation at this time with a software called Wavefront. And well, during our discussion, I showed her a little bit what you could do also, because I did some animation before her with another software. And so slowly we had conversations. We were still having the same computer to work together. So you were doing the keyboard, I was doing the mouse, no? Something like this. So we met more and more focused and discussed about our own interest. And it became clear that we had a common vision about natural phenomena, how we looked at things. And then Christa said, well, I have an exhibition in September, and I'm planning to do some animations with some leaves. And I looked at it and I thought, maybe it would be interesting to make it real time, not just animate and make a movie, but really build up this plants. Maybe something, not just leaves, but the whole plants. And then the conversation went on, and then we saw, okay, there's a space where we could do something. But still, it was very theoretical because I didn't actually program yet this machine, but I knew it was possible to program real-time development, and this was the interesting part. There was only 2 months to make this piece possible, and it was a hard work because the interface was not existing yet, and I just had to make a lot of tests and find out, okay, well, I can measure the field around the plant. And for the programming, this was also a process of learning, so you also learned to program at this time, I remember. It was Silicon Graphic Machine, so they had C programming at this time. And so we had these 2 months to fix, and then no one day more than this to make it. And so it was actually working at the end.
Laurent often invented new technologies that didn't exist. For example, this tracking flashlight with 4 points didn't exist in '94. So he just invented a new interface. Or also for Evolve, the hand tracking of the hand in the pool didn't exist. So he also invented a hardware interface for it. Or for Haze Express, the screen, this was not possible to do a big touchscreen at that time. Touchscreens were very small, but we wanted a big window. So Laurent just invented these things and built it all by himself. So there's often a very big innovative aspect in terms of hardware interface and also software that goes with it.
We are an artist with 2 heads because we solely make works together. We don't produce work sometimes and then with like alone or with other people. We really are a one artist body with 2 thinking heads, which is not the easiest thing to have because then we have also to negotiate, the ideas, and it might be Christa's idea, it might be mine, and most of the time it's the sum of all.
I like this image, I like this metaphor, and it reminds me to complexity science. There's this idea that the whole is more than the sum of its parts, and it also goes back to interaction, because we often see, when we interact in the environment, it's not just this one-to-one, but what we do has an effect, and this has an effect, but it's not so linear. Or what James Lovelock says in the Gaia theory, it's not just about that we can control everything. At one point, the system becomes so complex, it's non-linear, it's a dynamic system, and this is, I think, also a very good symbol for what we are trying to do with our artworks.